didn't break the wine glass. I didn't throw a punch. I didn't even let my face change. That's the part nobody understands when I tell this story. They expect a man who walked into his own anniversary party, saw his wife with her tongue down another man's throat in the kitchen pantry, and then went nuclear. Smashed something. Made a speech. At least raised his voice. I did none of that. I just stepped back from the doorway, turned around, and walked into the living room where our friends were laughing about something on someone's phone. I picked up my drink from the side table where I'd left it 10 minutes earlier. I took a sip, and I smiled at my best friend's wife when she asked me if I was having a good night. I told her I was having the best night of my life, and in a way that I couldn't explain to her, or to anyone else in that room. I meant it, because in the time it took me to walk from that pantry doorway back to the living room, something inside me had gone very, very quiet. And I already knew, before my heart had finished beating its way through the shock, that I was going to take everything from her. Not in a dramatic way, not with screaming or police or fists, in the way a man with patience and money and a good lawyer takes things. Slowly. Legally. Permanently. My name doesn't matter for this story. Call me whoever you want. I'm 53, I'd been married to the same woman for 26 years, and 3 weeks before the night I just described, my wife had baked me a peach cobbler from scratch and told me I was the best thing that ever happened to her. The man in the pantry was Tobias. Tobias had been my law school roommate. Tobias was the best man at our wedding. Tobias was the godfather to our youngest daughter. Tobias had eaten Thanksgiving dinner at our table for 19 years in a row, including the year his own mother died, when my wife held him on our back porch while he cried so hard he couldn't breathe. That was a man whose hands were on my wife's hips while she pressed him against a shelf of canned tomatoes. I want to be honest about something. In the seconds right after I saw them, before I made the decision to walk away, I felt something I had never felt before in my life. It wasn't rage. Rage I could have handled. Rage is loud and fast and it burns itself out. What I felt was colder than that. It was the feeling of every assumption I had ever made about my own life being deleted, one by one, in real time. Like watching a hard drive get wiped. And under that, faintly, something else. Embarrassment. Not for them. For me. For the version of me who had spent the last decade buying her birthday flowers and texting her from the office and rubbing her feet on Sunday nights while she complained about her sister. The man who, just 20 minutes earlier, had clinked his glass against Tobias's and thanked him for being the brother he never had. I think that's the part that nobody who hasn't been through it can really understand. The betrayal hurts, but the humiliation of who you used to be, the man you were yesterday, who didn't know yet, that's what stays with you. That's the wound that doesn't close. So I walked back into the living room. I smiled. I held a conversation about somebody's son getting into Notre Dame, and about an hour later, when my wife emerged from the kitchen looking flushed and laughing too loudly at one of her own jokes, I crossed the room and kissed her on the temple and told her she was glowing tonight, and she squeezed my hand and said, "I love you, you know that?" I said, "I do." I had never lied to her before. That was the first time. We drove home at midnight. She talked the whole way about the appetizers and whether the caterer had charged us for the extra cheese plate. I drove the speed limit and made the right noises. When we got home, she went upstairs to take off her makeup, and I stood in our kitchen for a long time looking at the refrigerator. There was a magnet on it that our oldest had made in 2nd grade. A clay sun with a crooked smile. The magnet was 21 years old. It was holding up a photo from our trip to the Outer Banks 3 summers ago. My wife in a straw hat, laughing at something I'd said behind the camera. I took the photo down. I put it in a drawer. Then I went to bed and lay next to her in the dark and listened to her breathing slow down into sleep, and I made a list in my head of everything I was going to do. First thing the next morning, I called my brother. My brother is not a man who handles emotion well, but he is a man who handles logistics. He'd gone through his own divorce 6 years earlier, an ugly one, and he had names. Names of lawyers. Names of accountants. Names of private investigators who specialized in what he called domestic discovery. I didn't tell him what had happened yet. I just said, "I need the lawyer's number, the one you used, today." He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I will be." He gave me the number. He didn't push. I called the lawyer from a parking lot at the hardware store. Her name was Margot something. I forget her last name now. But I remember the way her voice didn't change when I explained the situation. Like she'd heard it 1,000 times. She probably had. She asked me 3 questions. Did I have proof? Did I have joint accounts? Did my wife know I knew? I said no, yes, and no. She said, then do not change a single thing about your behavior. Not one. Come to my office on Thursday. Bring tax returns for the last 5 years and a list of every account in either of your names. Do not move money. Do not pack a bag. Do not look at her differently. You hear me? I said I did. She said, most men who walk into my office don't get this part right. They get angry. They make a scene. They give her the warning shot. By the time we file, she's hidden everything she can hide. Don't be that guy. I told her I wasn't going to be that guy. I drove home and I made my wife pancakes. She came down the stairs in her robe and her hair still wet from the shower, and she leaned against the kitchen island and watched me flip them, and she said, "What's the occasion?" I said, "Just felt like it." She kissed the back of my neck. She actually kissed the back of my neck. She actually kissed the back of my neck, and in the part of my brain that wasn't already several moves ahead in a chess game she didn't know we were playing, I noted that she smelled like our shampoo, the expensive one I'd bought her for Christmas. For the next 6 weeks, I lived 2 lives. The day life where I was the same husband I'd always been. I brought her coffee in the morning. I asked about her day. I sat through dinner with her parents on a Sunday and laughed at her father's stories about the Marines. I told her I loved her every night before I turned out the light. And the nightlife, where I was building a case. I had a private investigator on her within 4 days. I had a forensic accountant going through our finances. I had a copy of every joint tax return, every retirement account, every credit card statement, in a banker's box at my brother's house. I had photographs. I had a hotel receipt from a Hyatt 40 miles away from our home, from a Tuesday afternoon when she had told me she was at her book club. I had her text messages, pulled through a method I will not describe here because I'm still not sure it was entirely legal. But I will tell you, they were the worst thing I have ever read. Not because they were graphic, although some of them were, because of one specific message she had sent him 6 months before our anniversary party, in which she described me as a kind, boring man who would never know the difference. A kind, boring man. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the accountant's office and read that message, and I felt something physical happen in my chest, like a tendon snapping. I put my forehead on the steering wheel and I waited for it to pass, and then I sat up and I wiped my eyes with my sleeve, and I drove to a sandwich shop, and I ate a turkey club, and I went back to work. A kind, boring man. I kept that one. I filed it away. The hardest part wasn't the investigating. The hardest part was the children. My son is 24 and lives in Denver. My oldest daughter is 21 and in her senior year at a school back east. My youngest is 19 and a sophomore studying nursing. They didn't know anything. They didn't know anything. They thought their parents were the gold standard. They thought our marriage was the thing they were going to measure their own relationships against. About a month into my second life, my oldest called me on the Saturday. We talked for a while about her thesis, and a guy she was sort of seeing. Then, in the middle of a sentence, about something else entirely, she stopped and said, "Dad, is something going on with you and Mom?" I felt the floor go out from under me. I said, "What makes you ask that?" She said, "I don't know. You sound different, like you're listening to me from far away." I closed my eyes. I was sitting in my home office, the one with the door that locked, and through the wall I could hear my wife in the kitchen making tea, humming. She always hummed when she made tea. Humming. She always hummed when she made tea. I said, "Honey, I love your mother. We've been married for 26 years. There are seasons in every marriage. You don't worry about us." She said, "Okay." She didn't believe me. I could tell. But she let it go. When I hung up, I sat in that chair for a long time. I think that was the closest I came in those 6 weeks to picking up the phone and calling my wife into the room and ending it right there. Because I realized something in that moment that I hadn't fully let myself realize before. I was going to have to tell my children. I was going to have to be the one who told them. And no matter how careful I was, no matter how slowly and gently I did it, there was going to be a moment in each of their lives when I was the man who took their mother away from them. Even though I wasn't, even though she had done this, they were going to look at me, and the first second after I told them was shock and confusion and a little bit of fear, and I was going to have to live with that look for the rest of my life. I'll tell you when I knew I was going to be okay. It wasn't a big moment. It was small. It was a Wednesday night, about 5 weeks in. My wife was at what she said was a yoga class, which my investigator had confirmed was actually a wine bar downtown with Tobias. I was home alone. I had ordered Chinese food, and I was eating it on the couch and watching a documentary about the construction of the Hoover Dam. I don't know why I remember that. I just do. And while I was sitting there, eating shrimp lamine, watching engineers in 1933 pour concrete in the desert, I realized that I felt peaceful. For the first time in 6 weeks, I wasn't bracing. I wasn't bracing. I wasn't performing. I was just a man on his couch, eating his dinner, watching a show that interested him. And it occurred to me that I had not felt this way in my own house in a very, very long time. Long before the affair. Maybe years. I had been performing for her for years, and I hadn't even known it. That was the moment I stopped grieving. I'm not saying the pain went away. The pain came back, in waves, for a long time after that. I'm just saying that the part of me that was still hoping it had all been a misunderstanding, or that we could fix it, or that there was some version of this where I kept her, that part of me went to sleep and didn't wake up again. The next day I told the lawyer we were ready. We filed on a Monday morning. Margot's office served the papers at my house at 2014 in the afternoon, while my wife was home. I made sure I was not there. I was sitting in a coffee shop 3 miles away with my phone face down on the table. My instructions to my lawyer had been very specific. I wanted to be reachable but not present. I wanted my wife to have to receive those papers from a stranger, in her own kitchen, without the satisfaction of an audience. She called me 11 minutes after the papers were served. I didn't answer. She called me 11 minutes after the papers were served. I didn't answer. She called again, and again, and again. She called 23 times in the next 2 hours. She sent 41 text messages. I read none of them. I sat in that coffee shop and I drank a black coffee, and then a second black coffee, and then I watched a young couple at the next table argue about whether to get a dog. The girl wanted a rescue. The boy wanted a golden retriever. I thought about how young they looked. I thought about how little they knew about what was ahead of them. And about 5 o'clock, my brother pulled up outside. He drove me to the hotel I'd booked, a nice one, downtown. I had a bag packed in the trunk of his car. I'd packed it 3 days earlier and stored it at his house. That first night in the hotel, I lay on top of the comforter in my clothes, and I cried for about an hour. Not the polite kind of crying, the other kind, the kind that scrapes you out from the inside. And then I got up, and I washed my face, and I ordered a club sandwich from room service, and I called my children. I called my son first. He's the oldest, and I knew he'd want to hear it from me before his sisters did. I told him the truth. Not all of it, but enough. I told him his mother had been involved with someone else for at least 8 months that we knew of. I told him I had filed for divorce that afternoon. I told him I loved him and that none of this was about him or his sisters, and that I was sorry. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Dad, was it Tobias?" I didn't say anything. He said, "I knew it. I knew it. I knew it. I knew it." And he started to cry. That was the worst phone call in my life. Not because he was angry at me, because he had seen it or sensed it at some point in the last year. And he had said nothing because he hadn't trusted what he was seeing. And he had been carrying that all by himself. I called the girls after that. The youngest screamed at me. Not because she didn't believe me, because she did, and she didn't know what to do with it. She hung up on me twice and called back both times. The oldest, my serious one, listened all the way through and then said in a very small voice, "Dad, are you going to be okay?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Promise me." I said, "I promise." I didn't sleep that night. My wife's response to all of this was something I should have predicted, but didn't. She decided that I was the bad guy. Not at first. At first, she was contrite, begging. The text messages, which I eventually read, went through phases. First, she said it was a misunderstanding. Then she said it was a mistake. Then she said it was a mistake. Then she said it had only happened once or twice. Then she said it had only really started because she felt invisible in our marriage. Then she said I had pushed her into it by working too much. Then she said I was a coward for not confronting her face to face. And then, somewhere around week 3 of the proceedings, she went on a fence. She started telling people I had abandoned her, that I had been planning to leave her for years, that I had hidden money, that I had been emotionally abusive. She told her sister this. She told her parents. She told some of our mutual friends. 3 of them called me separately in a single afternoon to ask if any of it was true. I told each of them the same thing. I said, I'm not going to say anything bad about her. The lawyers will handle the facts. If you want to know what happened, ask her where she was on Tuesday afternoons last winter. Ask her about Tobias. 2 of those 3 friends I never heard from again. They chose her. That's fine. The third one, a guy I had known since I was 19, drove 3 hours to take me out for a steak the following weekend and told me he was sorry and that he should have called me sooner. That's how it goes. You find out who your friends are. The number is always smaller than you think. Tobias's wife found out about 2 months in. I did not tell her. I want to be clear about that. I had thought about it. In those first weeks, I had imagined dropping an envelope of photographs on her porch. I had imagined the satisfaction of it, but in the end I didn't do it because she had 3 children of her own and she had never done a thing to me, and I was not going to be the man who detonated her life because someone had detonated mine. She found out anyway. She found out because Tobias confessed 2 months in when the proceedings became impossible to hide. She showed up at my hotel room with red eyes and a bottle of bourbon and said, I want to know everything. I told her what I knew. We sat in those 2 chairs by the window, and we drank that bottle of bourbon together, and we did not cry, either of us. We were past crying. Before she left, she said something to me that I think about a lot. She said, you know what the worst part is? It's not that they did it. It's that they thought we were too stupid to figure it out. A kind, boring man. A stupid wife. That's what they thought of us. The people who'd promised to love us. The divorce took 8 months. I won't bore you with the details because they are the details of every divorce. The accountants found everything she had tried to hide, including a savings account she had opened in her maiden name 2 years before the affair was supposed to have started, which told us a lot about how long it had really been going on. The judge was not impressed with her. She walked out of that courtroom with significantly less than she had walked in expecting. I am not going to feel bad about that. I worked for 30 years to build what I built. She got exactly half of the part she was entitled to, and not a dollar of the part she wasn't. Tobias's marriage ended too. He lost his wife. He lost his house. He lost most of his friends, and he lost his standing in our local bar association. After his wife, who was not a woman to be quiet about her grievances, made sure everyone knew exactly what he had done, he moved away. I think he lives in Phoenix now. I don't really care. My ex-wife, and I will tell you, it took me almost 2 years to be able to say those words out loud without my voice catching, moved into a condo across town. The last I heard, she was working part-time at a boutique and dating a man 15 years younger than her, who, according to my middle daughter, asked her for money within the first month. I have no opinion about that. I genuinely don't. The thing I want to tell you, the thing I think nobody told me when I was going through it, is this. The worst part is not the discovery. The worst part is not even the divorce. The worst part is the year afterward, when you are alone for the first time in 3 decades, and you have to figure out who you are without her. Because for 26 years, I had been a husband. That was my main job. I was a lawyer too, and a father, and a son, and a brother. But if you'd asked me at any point in those 26 years what I was, the first word out of my mouth would have been husband. And then one day I wasn't. And I had to figure out what was underneath that word. What had been there before I met her, at 24, in a coffee shop in Charlottesville. What was still there now, at 53, in a rented apartment with rented furniture and a balcony that looked out on a parking lot. It turns out there was a lot there. I just hadn't been paying attention to it. I started running. I hadn't run in 20 years. I was terrible at first. I could barely make it to the end of the block. By the end of that first year, I could do 5 miles without stopping. I lost 22 pounds. My back stopped hurting. I started sleeping through the night for the first time since my 40s. I learned how to cook. Not warming things up. Actual cooking. I bought a cookbook and I worked through it one recipe at a time. And by the time I had finished it, I could feed myself any meal I wanted, and I have not eaten a frozen dinner since. I started calling my children more. Not less, the way some divorced fathers do. More. I called my son every Sunday. I flew out to see my daughters whenever they would let me. I took my youngest to a Phillies game in the spring, and she cried in the 7th inning. Out of nowhere, and put her head on my shoulder, and I let her cry, and I didn't try to fix it. And she said later that it was one of the best days she'd had in a year. My children and I are closer now than we ever were when I was married to their mother. I am not proud to say that. I think a better man would have found a way to be that close to them inside the marriage. But I am telling you the truth. And the truth is that being free of the performance I didn't even know I was performing made me a better father. Sharper, more present, less tired. About 14 months after the divorce was final, I went out for coffee with a woman. Just coffee. She was a friend of my brother's wife, and they had been quietly trying to set us up for months, and I had been quietly refusing. But this one Saturday, I said yes. Her name doesn't matter. She's a kind woman. She's a widow. She lost her husband to cancer 5 years ago, and she has 2 grown children, and she likes gardening, and she reads more books in a month than I read in a year. We had coffee. We had coffee again the next week. We have been having coffee again the next week. We have been having coffee in various forms for about a year and a half now. She has not moved into my apartment, and I have not moved into her house, and neither of us is in any hurry to change that. We see each other 3 or 4 times a week, and we go to bed in our own beds most nights. And I have never once, in 18 months, felt like I was performing for her. She knows what I look like in the morning. She knows what I sound like when I'm tired. She has met my children, and they like her, and she likes them. And that's all I'll say about that, because she is a private person, and this is not really her story. This is my story, and the reason I'm telling it is not because I want sympathy. I don't. I am okay. I am better than okay. I am for the first time in my adult life on my own terms. I'm telling it because I know what it's like to be the man in that pantry doorway. Frozen. Not screaming. Not sure if what you just saw is real. Wondering, in a slow-motion sort of way, what your life is going to look like in 5 minutes, or in 5 months, or in 5 years. I'm telling it because somebody is going to read this, or hear this, and they are going to be standing in their own version of that doorway right now. And I want them to know 2 things. The first thing is that the way you respond in the next 5 minutes will matter for the next 5 years. Do not scream. Do not throw the punch. Do not give her or him the warning shot. Walk away. Get quiet. Call the lawyer in the morning. Build your case. The law is not on the side of the betrayed by accident. It is on your side only if you use it well, and you cannot use it well if you have already burned the evidence by losing your temper. The second thing, and this is the harder thing, is that the worst day of your life is not actually the worst day of your life, is not actually the worst day of your life. The worst day is the day you found out you've been lied to. After that, every day gets a little better. Not in a straight line. There are weeks where you slide backward. There are nights, even now, 3.5 years later, where I wake up at 3 a.m. and have to remind myself who I am, but the trajectory is up. You will sleep again. You will eat a meal that tastes like something again. You will laugh at something stupid on television and realize you forgot for a whole minute that any of this happened. You will be a better father, or mother, or brother, or sister than you were before. Because you will have learned what it costs to lie, and you will refuse to lie anymore, even the small lies that hold most marriages together. You will, eventually, be sitting on a porch somewhere on a summer evening, and a person you love and trust will hand you a glass of wine, and you will take a sip of it, and you will look out at whatever's in front of you, a yard, a street, a sunset, your own 2 hands, and you will feel something you had forgotten was possible. You will feel like yourself. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing. I was a kind, boring man. She was right about that. I was kind, and I was probably a little boring. I am still kind, and I was probably a little boring. I am still kind. I am, by my new partner's account, slightly less boring than I used to be. But the thing my ex-wife never understood, in all the years she was rolling her eyes at the kind, boring man who paid the mortgage and showed up at the school plays and rubbed her feet on Sunday nights, was this. Kindness is not weakness. Quiet is not stupidity. And a man who does not scream at the moment of his deepest pain is not a man who isn't feeling it. He is a man who is feeling it so completely that he has already started planning the rest of his life. I did not break the wine glass that night. I did not throw a punch. I did not let my face change. I walked away. I built a case. I took back my life. And by morning, not the morning after the party, but the morning that came 8 months later, when the judge banged the gavel and I walked out of that courthouse into a cold November sun, she was the one in tears. I was not. I have never been. Since. I've thought about that night in the pantry doorway more times than I can count. Not because I want to relive it. I don't. But because something happened to me in those 5 seconds that I didn't understand until much later. And I think it's the thing worth passing on. What happened was this. The world I had built. The marriage, the friendship with Tobias, the assumption that the people in my house loved me the way I loved them. That world ended. And in the space where it ended, I had a choice. I could fill that space with rage, the way most men do, or I could fill it with something quieter and, in the long run, more powerful. I chose the second one, not because I am a saint. I'm not. I chose it because somewhere underneath the shock, I knew that the man who screams in that pantry is the man who loses. The law, the children, the rest of his own life, all of it goes to the person who keeps his head. There is a law that runs through every life I have ever observed up close, and it is older than any religion and simpler than any philosophy. What you do comes back to you. Not always quickly, not always in the form you expect, but it comes back. My wife spent 8 months building a life on a lie, and she spent the next 8 months losing everything that lie had been protecting. Tobias spent a year telling himself he was clever, and he spent the year after that learning he was not. And I, the kind and boring man, spent 6 weeks learning to be patient, and I spent the rest of my life being free. That is the cause, and that is the effect. There is nothing mystical about it. It is just what happens when you tell the truth to yourself about who people are, and you act, slowly and carefully, on what you see. If I could leave you with anything, it would be 3 things. And they are not 3 things I learned from a book. They are 3 things I learned from sitting in a hotel room in my clothes and crying for an hour and then ordering a sandwich. The first is to be a decent person, even when nobody is checking. My wife was not a decent person. She thought decency was something you performed for an audience. And when she found a room with no audience in it, the pantry, the Hyatt 40 miles away, the wine bar she lied about, she stopped performing it. A person whose decency depends on being watched is not actually decent. A person whose decency holds up alone, in the dark, with no one keeping score, is the only kind worth being. The second is to think. Really think. Not react. My lawyer told me that most men lose their divorces in the first hour after they find out. I did not lose mine because I sat in my car and I thought, and then I went home and I made pancakes, and then I called my brother. The mind is the only weapon you actually have. The third is to keep going. To get up. To run a mile, then 5. To cook a meal. To get up. To run a mile, then 5. To cook a meal. To call your children. The body and the routine will pull you forward even when the heart cannot. That is not poetry. That is the only thing that worked. Be decent. Be smart. Be sittin'. Be smart. Be steady. The rest takes care of itself.